Episode 23, What Right Do You Have to Use Me? Hearing Natalie's screams, Tom walked over with a frown and shouted angrily, "You ungrateful child! I raised you, and not only have you disgraced our family, you dare to say such outrageous things. You should call Bryce right now, or else you'll never walk out of this place." Natalie's entire body went cold. She acknowledged what she hadn't seen before, that her father, who she had once respected, was really like this. In her heart, she was worried about Liam, so she said straightforwardly, "Bryce and I are not connected to each other in any way. We have no relationship at all. You can't imprison me forever. Just let me go." Cheryl snickered. The ridicule was obvious in her eyes. "Like I said, why would someone like Bryce fall for you?" She recalled the bullying she and Nick had suffered at the party and grew even angrier. She continued with a sneer. "The reason he said those things at the party was because he thought you were pitiful. You aren't brave, Natalie. You're despicable." Natalie glared furiously at her sister as she brought up the past. She bit her lips tightly to prevent herself from crying. As long as they let her go, it didn't matter if she was despised. But she had underestimated her family's heartlessness. The truth about her and Bryce had left Tom fuming. He said coldly, "It's better if the child dies, or else he will only embarrass me. As for you, you will marry Mr. Wilson. You will enjoy endless wealth and prosperity. You can thank me later." Natalie sneered. Her entire body trembled with anger. He wanted her to marry that old man. If she did that, she would never have a happy life. They really had thought everything through. And now they were just waiting to watch her make a fool of herself? Impossible. "I won't marry anyone. Since you've already disowned me, I have nothing to do with you anymore. What right do you have to use me? You greedy devils! Let me out!" Looking at her father, she felt a sense of unfamiliarity and coldness. She wanted to rip their faces off. It might be true that she had shamed the family, but Liam was innocent. He was such a young child, and yet they were so heartless toward him. They were simply cold-blooded. If she hadn't been locked in this room, she felt that she would have done it. She would have attacked them. She was furious. This home, which she once risked her life to protect, had completely destroyed her in the end. Tom frowned and retreated a few steps when he saw the fury in Natalie's eyes. He glanced impatiently at Natalie before turning around to leave. She panicked and screamed with all her might, "Let me out! Let me out!" He paused. Without even looking at her, he continued, "I've already arranged with Mr. Wilson that he will meet with you tomorrow. If you know what's good for you, you won't do anything stupid." As they left, the despair in Natalie's eyes grew even more intense. She lowered her head and let out a hoarse cry. When she thought about Liam's cute, innocent face, she couldn't stop crying. She swore that if anything happened to him, she would kill them all and let them join him in death. She should never have come back here. Every minute and every second was torture. It wasn't until the afternoon of the next day that someone came to the room. 2 burly men walked in and pulled Natalie up from the ground without a shred of pity. She didn't even have the strength to fight back. She knew that she was going to see Mr. Wilson. As she thought about this, she secretly observed her surroundings, waiting for an opportunity to escape. She was brought to the dining table. Around it sat a few people, all rich and powerful. She refused to move, but the burly man beside her brought her over to Mr. Wilson and the others. Because she was going to see Mr. Wilson, Tom had had someone change her clothes. Her hair and cheeks were done up slightly, which made her pretty face look even more charming. Mr. Wilson stared at her without blinking. He praised Tom repeatedly. "Mr. Davidson, you sure are fortunate. Your 2 daughters are so beautiful." As he said this, his eyes never left Natalie. His lustful gaze made her nauseous. The man looked to be in his 40s. She turned her face away in disgust, but one of the bodyguards forced her to sit beside him. Tom glared fiercely at her. He smiled apologetically at Mr. Wilson and said, "You are too kind. My eldest daughter is just a savage little girl. She's lucky that you like her." Mr. Wilson was very satisfied with these words, and he ignored the clear dislike in Natalie's eyes. After all, she was a woman, and meeting an unfamiliar man for the first time would inevitably make her uncomfortable. He would change her mind. Tom gave Natalie a meaningful glance and said, "What are you sitting there for? Why don't you drink a glass of wine with Mr. Wilson?" The waiter tactfully poured a glass of wine for her, but she just sat there and watched, unmoved. Mr. Wilson felt insulted. He squinted his eyes and said with a sneer, "Mr. Davidson, I think your daughter is unwilling." Tom's face darkened for a moment as he silently cursed this daughter of his for spoiling his plans. But he couldn't get angry at her while other people were around. He could only smile apologetically again. "My daughter has just returned from overseas and is still not familiar with the etiquette here. Please don't mind her." He raised his glass and hurriedly toasted Mr. Wilson. "We will be family soon. Let me drink this wine to show my respect." Mr. Wilson's expression lightened. He nonchalantly brought the glass of wine to his lips for a sip and looked at Natalie. He looked as if he couldn't wait to strip her of her clothes. His undisguised desire made her want to vomit. At the other end of the table, Bryce was chatting with a friend when he spotted Natalie. His eyes squinted dangerously. So she was also here. What a coincidence. He wouldn't have to look for her. Episode 24. Why Did You Kiss Me? Bryce had been silently observing Natalie. He was surprised to find that he was concerned about this woman. Originally, he had planned to tell his men to bring her back after the business deal was concluded. Thinking of this, he withdrew his gaze and continued to talk business with his friends. He couldn't help but find it funny. Since when had he cared so much about her? At the other end of the table, Natalie didn't know that Bryce was here. Although she was sitting next to Mr. Wilson, she was too distracted planning her escape. At that moment, a waiter came to deliver some dishes. Natalie saw an opportunity and immediately got up and knocked over the table. The dishes scattered all over the place with a loud crash, and everything immediately descended into chaos. Tom's two lackeys ran over to grab Natalie, but she threw a bowl of soup at them, and they stopped. Tom reacted at once and called his other men to block her escape. He was infuriated. He planned to punish her severely when he would catch her. Natalie, of course, was not stupid. She had expected her father to do this. So she grabbed hold of the waiter and asked anxiously, "How do I get to the back door?" Shocked by her panicked expression, the waiter hurriedly pointed the way, seeing that the bodyguards were coming for her. She didn't have time to thank him. She sprinted away. There were no guards at the back door, but she didn't dare to slow down until she reached the road. She wanted to stop a cab, but there wasn't even the shadow of a car anywhere in sight. She quickly became extremely anxious. Even though it was June, she broke out in a cold sweat. If she was caught this time, her punishment wouldn't be as simple as marrying that old man. A Cadillac suddenly stopped in front of her, blocking her way. It was obvious that the car had stopped for her. Natalie thought that her father had sent people after her, so she stared at the car with a pale face and forgot to run. The car window slowly rolled down, revealing Bryce's grave expression. All he said was, "Get in." Knowing that her father and his men would catch up to them soon, Natalie didn't have time to think. She opened the car door and got in. The driver stepped hard on the accelerator and the car sped away. Natalie looked back with lingering fear. She saw her father's men run out into the road behind them, but the car sped off and left them far behind. It wasn't until they were completely out of sight that she managed to breathe again. She turned around and smiled gratefully at Bryce. "Thank you." Bryce nodded but didn't say anything. From the moment she had gotten into the car, his eyes had never left her. He hadn't realized before that this woman was so stubborn. Unconsciously, he started to develop a whole new level of respect for her. Under his gaze, Natalie felt a little uncomfortable. She covered up her embarrassment by coughing lightly and said, "I will, get out just up here. I don't want to trouble you too much." Now that she had finally escaped, The most important thing was to find Liam. As for Bryce, she would definitely pay him a visit before she left. She still didn't know where her son was, and the more she thought about it, the more anxious she became. Her heart was filled with hatred for her family. She clenched her fists, and a sharp pain shot through her hand. Spreading her palms open, she frowned. Only then did she realize that her hands had been scalded, and the surrounding skin was inflamed. She must have accidentally burned herself when she flipped the table, but she wasn't in the mood to care. She was about to close her hand again when Bryce, who was sitting beside her, quickly grabbed it. His closeness stunned her, and for a moment she forgot to resist. "You're hurt," he said, and instructed the driver, "Go to the hospital." Natalie quickly pulled her hand back with an unnatural flush on her cheeks and said, "You don't have to take me to the hospital. Take me to the hotel if you don't mind. I'm going to find Liam." When she mentioned Liam, she finally lost control of her emotions, and her eyes reddened slightly. Bryce pulled back his hand. He could still feel Natalie's warmth on his fingertips. He had never felt anything like this before. Conflicted, he turned his gaze away to hide his emotions and ignored what she had said. "Driver, hurry up and go to the hospital," he repeated. Natalie was so angry that she couldn't take it anymore. At that moment, she forgot that Bryce had just saved her, and she yelled at him, "What are you doing? I said I'm not going to the hospital. I want to go back to the hotel. My son is lost. He disappeared 2 days ago." Thinking about Liam, she felt unbearably sad. She was about to say something else to make him let her go when Bryce lowered his face cautiously toward her and kissed her lips. Natalie's eyes opened wide as she looked at the handsome figure in front of her. Her mind was blank. She could not react. Bryce was also stunned by what he had done. He had been thinking that he wanted to stop her shouting, but he hadn't known that he would do something as outrageous as kiss her. He quickly came to his senses. Pulling away from her, he said, "Finally, you're quiet." Natalie's face turned red once again. For a moment, she forgot about her argument with him. All she could think about was the kiss. Why had he kissed her? She asked him. Bryce raised his eyebrows. He still didn't show any emotion as he said indifferently, "It was just a way to shut you up. You're too loud. It was annoying." Natalie's face immediately flushed red, but this time it was out of anger. What kind of person was he? He was infuriating, but he had also saved her, and she was worried about Liam, so she couldn't be bothered with him just then. The car soon arrived at the hospital. Natalie went straight inside to get her hands bandaged. Bryce waited in the car for a long time. He didn't know what was going on. Natalie left the hospital as soon as she could. The hot weather made her wounds sting, so she got some painkillers. When she was finally able to leave, she was surprised to see that the conspicuous car was still there.